It has been brought to our attention that depending on the platform that you listen to, you can no longer hear some of our previous episodes.
Some of our favorite episodes.
Some of the ones where people would reach out and say, hey, listen, I can't believe that you talked to insert whatever name here.
And honestly, it makes us a little sad that you can't go back in time and have a listen because the stories were really incredible.
We reference a lot of times, we had a chance to talk with so-and-so in the past. And if you can't go back, then it's kind of just, So we wanted to bring some of those guests, some of those former guests back into the spotlight.
We're going to call it like a rerun, I think.
A Why Me Project rerun.
Do you remember those?
I do. Back in the day, or you used to throw the tape into the VCR and, we're dating ourselves.
We are, but a rerun was the opportunity to rewatch one of your favorite episodes. Now everything's so accessible. Well, we thought it was.
Yeah, exactly. So without further ado,
here's your Why Me Project rerun.
We don't always get to dive into a bunch of different genres,
right,
if you will. And so our guest this week, I would say, is probably one of the most eclectic, well-versed maybe. And this is from an outsider's perspective. He could definitely prove us wrong. But Jesse Sprinkle, my friend, how are you?
I'm doing great. I'm looking forward to proving you wrong.
Well, the hardest question you will get is our very first one, and that is, Jesse, who are you and where did you come from?
Oh, my goodness. I am a mystery. No, I'm Jesse Sprinkle. I was born I say Seattle, Washington, but I was born and raised on a small island called Vashon Island right outside of Seattle. I'm a human person who's been a musician my entire life, and I grew up on the West Coast. I now live on the East Coast, father of 5. Tea fanatic is my next endeavor in life. Someday I want to be fully in tea and only partially in music. Right now it's the opposite. But, and I've been a photographer this whole time too as well. So nice. Those are the things, like definitely things surrounding the arts have been following me around my whole life. It's been a lot of different stages, of course, but I'm still here living and breathing.
I find that people who grew up on the West Coast a little more creative, a little more artsy. That might just be a generalization, or a stereotype of West Coasters. But for you, do you feel like where you grew up contributed to that creative brand that you have?
Yeah, absolutely. This came up in a conversation actually the other day. I'm really grateful for where I grew up and the time I grew up there. I definitely would not want to be there right now for a lot of different reasons. And I don't like to talk about politics so much, but I'm not a real big fan of what Seattle is at this time. But in the 90s, it was just the most thriving, booming, creative area. And obviously music, it transformed the world in the 90s. So, but just, yes, I think the overall culture out there is more artistic. So point being is, like, I feel like if I grew up here, I would not be wouldn't be installed with so much creativity, and probably wouldn't be challenged as much to be who I am. But now I just can kind of settle in and just kind of do my thing. It is quite calm out here. It's not that there's no music where I live, but it's not nowhere near the same. But you think about California and Oregon and Washington, there's a lot of, music, acting, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I think the stereotype is probably true, but
Seattle was more of, correct me if I'm wrong, like 80s time, that was more of like the grunge era, and that was kind of where that sound came from?
Most definitely. 80s into the early 90s. And then, even though my band wasn't grunge by any means, but I still think that energy of the creative music in that time frame affected us quite a lot.
So let's talk about then this love of music. Now, was music a big thing for you and your family? Because I think of you, I think of your brother, I think, poor old Lou in that. But was that something that your parents had instilled in you?
Yes. Yeah, I think so. I think it happened from both sides, naturally and encouraged by our parents. The thing I'm super grateful for is not many parents would say, yes, you can drop out of high school and go on tour. Like, most of my friends' parents would be like, absolutely not. So yeah, my dad is an incredible guitarist who won't admit that. And I know my mom has musicality in her blood, but it's not like she played music when we were younger. But my dad taught us a lot. And then we got started at a young age. And even one really important experience in our life, which I don't talk about a whole lot, but in the mid 80s, my dad got offered work in Southern California. So we moved from Seattle to Orange County. That was huge for our life because at that point, I was short. I didn't know I wasn't going to grow up taller, but I wanted to be, an athlete like every kid. So, but in California, there's this huge music scene. Like the radio was huge. They played, even on Christian radio, they played U2 and Stryper and, all the kind of cutting edge type stuff. So that's when I got interested in drums and I got interested in heavy metal and all that kind of stuff. So when we came back to Washington, which we didn't stay there very long, under 2 years, something was very different in me. So I think both me and my brother were inspired with music at that point. So it was sort of a destiny thing, and my parents definitely encouraged it. So it was a win-win thing there. So creatively, my life has been satisfying, but I think the occupation of being a musician is a disaster most of the time. But
yeah, it's tough. And there's so much that, COVID, now I can't tour. And what am I going to do now?
Yeah, it was hard enough as it was.
Yeah, right? Just compounded the difficulty level of being an artist and a musician who's on the road. I mean, I think most parents, like you said, would be like, finish your high school, at least, go to college. When are you going to find a real career? So I'm guessing that was really never a part of growing up for you. It was just like, seek your dreams and your passions. That's incredible.
It was great. And I'm hoping deep down that my parents really did know that we had something special, because I've seen, now that I've been on the production side of music, of course, you've seen 100, if not more, parents that come to you saying, oh, my kid is so talented. Of course, you want your kid to be talented. And once in a while they are, but like, I know for the most part, we see our children with, rose-colored glasses and want them to be the best at everything. So hopefully my parents really could tell that there was something special going on. But we are fortunate that they were behind us all the way. And my dad wasn't just like, it's okay to do that. He would drive us to gigs, before we were able to drive. I was playing clubs in Seattle at 14 years old. The clubs that like wouldn't even let me be in the club. I had to stay backstage the whole time because they have really strict liquor license and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So, but he was really proactive with our music, which was great. So yeah, grateful for that.
My son is a piano player, loved the sound of the guitar. Your parents are like, why did he have to choose the drums?
They must have had some special grace in that sense, because my brother doing music with guitar, like that's fine, but I'm sitting there practicing now. If you get into my early influences and if you are aware of what some of these bands are, Tourniquet, Mortification, Vengeance Rising, Deliverance, all that stuff, like just abrasively, obnoxiously loud music, to the point where I think my mom actually started to learn the lyrics to like death metal band songs and stuff. So it's amazing now that I think about having to endure that much noise. They should be in sainthood or something to that effect.
I'm sure now, being a parent of 5 children, you see this from a completely different lens. For you now, being a dad, 5 kids, are you going to be at the Von Trapp family and put them in the music route, or?
Well, they all are creative and talented in their own way, but I think they're going to kind of do their own thing instead of I'm trying not to make them, I'm letting them be who they are, obviously. I can tell they're all musical, but deep down, I wouldn't even wish upon them a music career unless they really, have it in them, because it's not just when I think I'm a weakling. The fact that I've been in music and haven't given up for, 30 years is pretty insane. I don't really understand that part, but the trick with parenthood, which as you know, is that balance between encouraging them and letting them, learn their own things. It's tricky, but a couple of my kids are very visually gifted. My oldest daughter is an incredible painter and artist that way. So it's neat to see all that stuff unfold.
So here you are at the age of 14, you're playing in clubs, at what point did you guys start kind of doing the whole touring across the US and realizing that maybe this music thing could become a career?
Again, what's different about being a kid in that time frame is, people come to me and say like, what's your advice for making it in the music industry? And like, I have no advice, because we just played music and then we were signed and then we were touring. Like, we didn't do any sort of promoting or like trying to do any of that kind of stuff. So I could tell something, was really happening, but the fact that I was, 14, 15 years old, we were playing gigs. And then when I was 15, 16 is when our demo got to the record company via Randy Stonehill and Terry Taylor. And then we're just signed. We're on a national label. I'm in high school. And then we start traveling. First, we just did trips up the coast because it was kind of difficult to go around the country. But still, by the time I was 18, I was traveling around the U.S., like not knowing how in the heck that happened or what, I'm not even thinking future. I'm just like, okay, we're doing music. So, and then from there, all the work for the rest of my life just kind of happened. I didn't really need to work on a resume or anything like that. It was just kind of one thing after another. In the sense of people, going to school for music, I almost always say, don't do it. You'll waste important years if you're doing that kind of work. Now, obviously, if you want to be a doctor or, in a symphony, then, maybe school would work. But that would have been really very counterproductive for me to say, hey, I have a degree. And I'd be like, I don't care. What can you play? So, yeah. And actually, my very first full U.S. tour was not even playing with Poraloo. I was drumming for Starflyer 59 on their first tour. The singer played drums on the record, so he couldn't do all that stuff. So that was a really interesting trip. And then it all just kind of unraveled from there. So in good ways.
It's interesting that you said you don't necessarily have to have this resume. I mean, you have a resume of playing with a number of bands,
right?
A number of different genres. How do you get hooked up with, let's say, a Demon Hunter or get hooked up with a Dead Poetic? Is it there's a ad and you just, there's a eBay online Kijiji
it's
ad?
More like
it just happen?
For one, I don't have an answer for it. But if I did make up an answer that was creative, that would be like the Sprinkle Mafia, I guess, is what it would be like. In general, it's kind of word of mouth or people know who you are. But in that specific case, I was pretty lucky with a stream of like 4 or 5 gigs in a row because my brother happened to be the main producer at Tooth and Nail. So
right.
With Demon Hunter, he's like, hey, Don and Ryan are doing this thing and, like try it out. And then it worked, and then with Dead Poetic, I happened to be in Seattle at the time and they were recording an album. And now this is a very sensitive subject because for the guy that was in the band, it was very unfortunate, but they started making their second record and basically the producer and label were like, this guy isn't good enough. So they just sent me in, called me in the next morning. I was in there playing drums on the record. So for me, it was good. For him, it was unfortunate because it was a very awkward session with him kind of moping around, trying to help me get ideas for the album. But I just don't think he was necessarily cut out for that gig, unfortunately. For those things. And also I played on 2 Cutlass records, which are technically some of the biggest projects I was on, but they weren't, they actually weren't able to put my name on the projects because of integrity matters. Like they don't want fans to think that they weren't good enough to be on the record, that kind of thing. But years later, I suppose it's okay for me. I don't think I'll get anyone after me if I say something about that, but So that was a big, that scene with the Tooth and Nail thing was pretty tight knit. So I think a lot of those things happen naturally, but.
Yeah. To be a studio drummer, I mean, that just means that's like a whole nother level of drumming. My brother-in-law is a drummer, and if you can sit there in a studio and be that clean and crisp, that's incredible. So even though you say it was the Sprinkle Mafia, there's definitely some talent in there.
So humble.
There's talent there too.
And I've tried to describe that. You understand, obviously, but some people can, jam out live and it's fine. But there's something about there's a nuance to drumming in the studio that a lot of people don't get, and I didn't even quite understand it for years until I got the best compliment I've ever got as the mixing engineer that mixed a lot of those records, and he told me how much he looks forward to me playing on the albums because of how easy it is for him to mix, and it's the way I'm hitting. So you can have 5 people hit the exact same drum and it will sing differently, like have different tones to it. So it's partially your accuracy in playing, but also the way that, same way with a guitar. I mean, someone could strum an acoustic guitar and just make it sound like garbage, just like, sound like that. And then other people could gracefully play it and it would just start singing. There is a big difference though, because it's almost like 2 completely different skill sets, but some people can have both or neither. I don't know, but it is something I really love to do. That's the benefit of the work I do now. So I run a studio full time now. The irony is I don't really like working on music that much anymore. I don't want to just bring anyone in and record because I'm just so tired of music. But one of the benefits is people get a session drummer here. So whether they're a singer songwriter without a drummer, I can play along with stuff. Or sometimes people just send me files from another state and say, hey, we just need drums on this and we'll finish it. Like that's helped me kind of keep the studio moving along, especially with the technological era that we're in. But
Is playing drums though with different styles, like whether it's hard rock or do you play it the same? Like as somebody who doesn't understand drums and you listen to it, because I listen to like a Demon Hunter album and it's and then you hear something and I'm like, this is.
And then I've got my acoustic folk stuff with like brushes and stuff like that. Yeah. I do play it different, but the thing that it took me a lot, like I inherited this from I'll just be honest, from my dad. Is very self-sabotaging and self-deprecating, but it's hard to give yourself compliments. I think a lot of us struggle with that, but through the years, I finally realized that it's not my skill set of like being able to play fast or complicated, but being able to just feel out different kinds of music. And then when people start to address that, like there's a signature sound that someone has, even if I'm playing louder music or quieter music, they can still say, hey, that definitely sounds like, Jesse playing that stuff. So in a way I do play, differently for the different styles, but I also know my limits and my boundaries. Like I can't, hack it with like the real deal, like jazz players. I could do some sort of fake jazz mixed with hip hop because that's what I grew up, listening to jazz loops on like a Tribe Called Quest record or something like that, where you can simulate a version of that. But, there's certain styles that I don't play like the super fast, complicated, we were on tour with Extol, like Demon Hunter and Extol. They were opening up for us, but I still think they were way better of a band. And we always felt super insecure when we started it. We get up on stage and we just watch them play. I'm just like, oh my gosh, I can't do this because they're really good. So, but I'll never be able to play to that extent. You don't have the interest of doing that. But these days I just like to kind of sit back in the pocket and just play, nice grooves and musical type beats and stuff, not like in musicals, but stuff that feels good.
Yeah. Next on Hamilton.
Yeah, exactly.
When did the discovery that you had some skills behind the lens come to light with your photography?
Very good question. Mostly on tours. Like, as I started traveling, I was obsessed with documenting it, and I didn't think of it in the sense of a fine art skill or a career or anything. I just loved, to remember the trips and stuff. And it started even my first tour. I just had a point and shoot camera and I got some pretty interesting pictures. And I had a few friends that were really talented musicians that were in my life, that inspired me a little bit at the beginning there. And I don't know, it just kind of unraveled like instantaneously. And I shot a lot with film for, a decade or so, and was a little late to the game with the digital cameras because I was so into, the old school camera approach. But now I'm grateful I've saved hundreds of thousands of dollars probably and not printing pictures unless you really need to, that kind of a thing. I honestly think I spend more time doing photography than I do music nowadays because it's just constant. Like I spend hours like editing pictures and going on walks or, pulling like on the way to church and everything. My family just like, I think they just bring books and phones with them because they know I'm going to pull off to the side of the road and like disappear into the woods or something like that. They're really used to it. Yeah. They're just wondering. Like, oh, okay. Sometimes like the sun's like beating off this lake that we drive by, these trees are like, it's like, yeah, that's just kind of nonstop. Like even when I'm burnt out on music, I find myself still just shooting all the time, which is pretty interesting. And I am actually launching a website with all that stuff after years and years of people saying like, why don't you do something with these? I just like post them online and people say like it. And that's about as far as it goes. But no, I'm starting a site where people can go through all the different categories of things. So to what end, I don't know, but give it a shot.
Yeah.
You've immersed yourself in music your whole life, and you talk about when you get burnt out. What does musical burnout, what is that like? Because for somebody like us, I mean, we do radio, but radio is kind of a different form of music. We're not immersed like you are.
To me, it's bad. To me, it's like it's like overdose meets depression. Like sometimes, and I have the funniest conversations with people because I almost get this sense of people just being disappointed and judging and angry with me when I say that. Because to most people, like music is the most beautiful, like it's their escape. It's the thing that
therapy too.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not like I've broken my relationship with music, but there are times where if you're working on it for days and days and days and days and days and days and days without a break, and the unfortunate part is a lot of times I have to hear the same song over again for hours and hours and hours and hours. And I'm not going to lie, sometimes these songs are not good. Like they're the things that make you not like music. So it's almost like I feel guilty that I'm pushing more mediocre music out into the universe, and I'm going to someday be on trial for it. But the side effects are the strange side effects though are sometimes a song just gets looped in my head and I can't get it out. And I like some nights I can't sleep. I have to actually put like a show on or something because the song just keeps looping through my head. And even sometimes good music does that too. It just happens. Or when I'm trying to write and I just don't want to hear music and then I just put it down and walk away. But I don't know. It's not the worst problem in the world. I suppose it'd be better than a lot of other things, but.
Burnout's still burnout, no matter
it is,
what,
and
right?
And the strangest, most patronizing thing that I get from people is like, "Oh, you get to do music, your life's great." It's like, okay, maybe it is sometimes, but the thought of hating something as beautiful as music is a terrible place to be. So, not that I hate it, but it can be. The
process can be tiring,
yeah,
for sure.
But I still keep making it. I teach sometimes, but those, students kind of come and go because, they don't realize how hard it is to play music sometimes.
Seriously.
And then, like I said, tea is one of the things that keeps me centered. And I'm not talking just like getting bags of tea. I'm talking like a fairly like lifestyle oriented, like learning about the regions and the different eras and all that kind of stuff. It's pretty overwhelming, but
that's cool.
But
We're
it's an
tea
art form in
drinkers
and of
here.
itself.
I mean,
Yeah,
I don't drink coffee now. I used to drink
Yeah.
tea only, and then I had 2 kids and no sleep. And now I need a little extra shot.
I like coffee, but it sometimes doesn't do well with me. So if I'm already anxious and I have coffee, it can make a day kind of go awry. So, but I get why people love it, whatever. But what I think people just don't realize the vast universe of tea. It's not just like, oh, there's green and black, and it's like there's just
white?
gazillions amounts, like subcategories within subcategories, And now I'm getting in like drinking tea like from the 1990s and stuff, and it's one of my favorite kinds. But unfortunately, it's either hard to find or not cheap to get. So
it's like wine. So you're like, oh, this is an oolong from 1993.
Correct. But
really,
but the funny thing is that there's one style of tea which is probably the most underrated or least talked about in the U.S. at least because it's not as common. Pu'er tea is actually a living tea. Like the leaves will ferment over time and actually transform. So sort of like you would kombucha or say sauerkraut or kimchi or something. It does ferment and actually have some form of microbiology going on. So it's very interesting. So it starts as a green tea, and then after 20, 30 years, it's a lot darker and deeper and all that. So it's mind blowing, but super good for you too.
I dislike a loose tea because I hate getting the little leafy things down at the bottom of my cup. So I need to have it bagged no matter what.
Oh yeah, well, there's easy ways to get around that. The loose leaf, I just strain it. I just steep it in one cup and then strain it out into the next one. And I can drink that for, half a day over and over and over again. Especially that kind of tea is for some reason more durable. Like I can drink it for hours, the same leaves. So that kind of helps center me too when life gets a little funky. So
before we ask you about, your why me moments and in the hills and valleys of life, you ask God that question, why me? I mean, you do have a new album that was released at the beginning of March and Universes. Is that kind of how you want your sound to be? Like when you go into it, it's just like, this is my sound. These are the songs I'm going to put out. Or do you have a vision as to what you wanted it to be like?
Sure.
Perfect.
The answer would be different depending on the album because this project actually is the last two. It's my music since lockdown, and it's stuff that I released in Patreon. So there was zero thought of how the songs connected to each one. It was just what's going on in this moment. Here's a song. That's why a couple of them are rap songs that I had to censor some of the lyrics, or just showing like there are some messages in there that are very, very unpopular with musicians that are like agreeing with the narrative of the way the world is right now. So I think the world should be, especially in the music world, should not be in agreement altogether. it went through a lot of different emotions. You know, one song was like, how can we just think about the scripture of, you know, things that are wonderful and beautiful, think on these things. I wanted one song that's just like, how can we think about the good things in life right now? Like, so there was almost no connection between each one, yet they're all within like that couple year experience of everyone dealing with the strangest world that we've ever seen in our lifetime. So
yeah, which is probably more true to life. I mean, one moment you can feel happy, the next moment depressed.
Yeah.
It's been such a challenging 2 years for so many, well, I'm going to say for everybody. The stats are really staggering with how many people are dealing with mental health. And I love that. It's just this hodgepodge of emotions. And,
it would be musical therapy would be the simplest way of putting it. And then it was kind of what kept me writing during that time, but I wasn't thinking so much about even an album. It was just more a couple weeks ago. I'm like, I should just put all these together, you know, because I know a lot of people wouldn't follow like each song as it happened. So it was more of a way to just collect that all for folks that generally don't care.
Yeah.
How do I say it nicely?
They just want a good song.
Yeah, exactly. But it does. I mean, sort of like what you were saying at the very beginning, though, is how eclectic, you know, there's 90s rock stuff, there's acoustic songs, there's a couple rap songs, there's, you know, elements where it gets a little heavier, and very seldom do I get to be lighthearted or, you know, bring my humor into it, which is what I do sort of with a couple other projects but it is really like all over the board musically. But that's just been my whole life. Like when I joined my first band, I was the only kid in there that was straight up into heavy metal. Like rap and heavy metal was all I listened to as a kid. And then I got into more of like the atmospheric music and then classical and then folk stuff, you know, so now it's just all over the place. So sometimes I think that's good. Other times it's confusing. Like I have no idea, but
I think a lot of people are like that now too, though, because we went from like having albums where everything kind of made sense and there was a theme.
Yeah.
And then Napster happens and, you know, we've moved into a digital world and now it's so single.
You just kind of hear this and that.
Yeah. Like so many playlists are like, oh, I'm in the mood for, I don't know, the sound of rain. Oh, but now I really need some hard drums.
Yeah. No, I know. I hear you. And I mean, in my whole life, I probably would say one genre I never liked was country music, but I ironically have played on and off with a couple country bands for money. I find a couple songs here and there I kind of like. I don't necessarily love the culture of it or the music scene of it necessarily, but there are good songs within it. So like I try to appreciate, or there's even alt country bands that, I don't know if you've heard Vigilantes of Love, but he has some country-like qualities in his music, even though it's more kind of folk music, but I really like his songs a lot.
Well, this is the Why Me Project podcast. So Can you think of any Why Me moments, whether it was in a valley where things weren't going so well or a mountaintop where you were just humbled to be in that position in that season?
I have an immediate mountaintop. So when I was talking earlier about just kind of going with the first thing that you think of, it was a mountaintop. I have years of valley moments. I wouldn't even know where to really. The valley would be like, why did I do music? Everybody in music is difficult. And that's more of just a process or whatever. But the good why me moment is I've pinched myself physically and emotionally. In 2008, I was asked to go on a short-term missions trip to East Africa. And it was at a time where, some people would be like, well, I'll pray about, it's like, no, sometimes you don't need to ask whether you should pray about, running somebody over with your car. You just know you shouldn't do it.
You shouldn't do it.
So I just was like, it felt like I got to do something with my life right now. So I went to Uganda and ended up going every year, sometimes twice a year.
Wow.
So I've been there 8 times and just fell in love with the people there. It wasn't, sure, there's this mix of sir, you're being helpful and you're helping and, you love being somewhere new, all this sort of stuff. But I just fell in love with that country, and it was difficult for me to not be there for a while. So, which is another reason why probably I hate the way the world is now, because I want to get back out there. But that was, and yeah, there's a lot of healing it did for me. I know a lot of times life is reciprocal when it comes to helping other people and they help you. So, someone can say that you're doing missions for selfish reasons. I don't care what people think. It felt like I needed to be doing it. So, and I'm still constantly involved with people's lives out there, even when I'm not physically there. But some of the moments I had in Uganda were beyond my wildest dreams, like ever. Like when I try to explain, I've been, whether it's been being on MTV or being, at festivals in front of thousands of people, or just in just really amazing moments, or when people tell you about, their friend died of a car accident and they were thinking about suicide and they heard your song and their life changed. Like all those things are incredible. But the moments I had doing music in Uganda, like everything like paled in comparison. Like I just like, how did I get here? Why am I doing this? Like, and it went from doing music to working with street kids to doing, a water project. There's all these different things I had my fingers in. And it was just beyond words. Like I didn't know how to explain it. I don't know how did this happen? Why me? And at the time, it's not like I was this great person that just had this vision for ministry, whatever. Like I was, I don't know how to say it without expletives, but like I was just I was messed up, like emotionally and just, professionally, all these sorts of things. And it just seemed like God still had a way to just put me somewhere else and do something with me regardless. So, that was one of the why me moments of like, why did I get chosen for this? And it's still, I feel like it's going to be a life thing actually, because I don't plan on breaking ties with those communities out there, even though I'm not going to be physically there as much. But anyways, that's a tip of the iceberg. So
it's amazing how we can go on these mission trips and we're like, we're going to go and we're going to change the world.
Yeah.
And then we get there and be like, oh, wow, do we suck? And
Yeah.
we get changed because of the people.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And it's very interesting because I want it to just be, brother and brother and brother and sister and sister and sister, like between the nations, because we go there. Obviously, we have resources to help some of those communities. Like the first few teams I went with were getting water towers that would help villages, get clean water. And that's fantastic. And we have the resources. We can raise money and we can get these there. But whenever we would leave the country, they would come to us saying, hey, can you give us advice? Because they look up to us as, and after 2 or 3 trips, I would just look at them and be like, yo, you guys, like, I feel like you should be sending me off with advice, because they live their faith out of necessity. Whereas a lot of times, and this, I don't think this is even up for debate, but, religion and church in America is kind of like a club or something. It's not the same sort of like desperate need for faith to survive. And it's just a part of your being quite the same way. It's a little more of like a cultural luxury or something, like, I don't know.
Yeah.
But it was very humbling to know that, or we can just help each other out in different ways. You know what I mean? Like we have different strengths and weaknesses and all that kind of stuff. So, but I'm still blessed that I'm in a place where even though I don't have a lot of funds, like somebody can contact me from Uganda and say, hey, like we have to get this surgery for my brother. We don't have the money. And I can just kind of say, okay, I can ask some people and then I can raise a little bit of money to help at least alleviate that stress for them. I'm not just going to take care of all their problems, obviously, but I can't even count the times that I've had families just help me out. They can tell that we're struggling or something. And they just, oh, I'll help you get through this situation. Like I don't deserve that. I didn't earn it or anything like that. So I just think that whole cycle can work, whether it's helping people up the road or people across the country or people on another continent. But yeah, but I'm with you though about they can help us out, encourage us a lot. So
It's amazing to me though, because you look at churches in developing countries and people are traveling hours upon hours sometimes to get there, and church service is not an hour. It's 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 hours
going.
where Western states in Canada, and then we're like, okay, church is over and out. The preacher's preaching way too fast. How
People
are we going to go and get
Praise and worship
we're
in 2
pushing
minutes
noon
over.
here, Pastor.
I know, dude. I do music on Sundays, which is weird. That's a whole other just confusing thing to me, because I thought I would be so tired of music and church, and I thought I would have just distanced myself from everything. But it's still a great community. We love being with these people, and even though I do get tired of music, I still help out there. But it's funny how we like 4 songs, finish it up so they don't like lose their attention span or whatever. It's like, but we got to drive 20 minutes. Although in the wintertime, it is really stressful to travel for me. I get a little anxious. But in Seattle, even though it rains a lot, there's no snow issues. So I didn't grow up with snow problems.
Oh, we did.
You Canadians probably know.
We did.
But yeah, life is bizarre though, you know.
Yeah, it is.
That's what I'm going to tell everybody here. Life is bizarre.
That sounds like a
Any
name of
words of
another
encouragement?
podcast.
Yeah.
Life
Life
is
is bizarre.
Tune in Thursday night.
At Jesse Sprinkle 1976 on the Insta, jessesprinkle.bandcamp.com. Brother, we appreciate you taking some time and sharing your heart today.
Yeah, it was beautiful.
Thank you for tuning in to an old episode, a past guest of our Why Me Project rerun.
Something that we're starting now because there were so many episodes that we really did love, and they've kind of disappeared from the digital world.
And speaking of digital world, I did a little recon. There are at least 9 different platforms in which you can listen to the Why Me Project podcast.
Okay.
So there's no excuses, but I mean, some of the main ones like Apple Podcast and or Spotify.
And you could always head to our social media accounts to stay up to date, as each and every Wednesday we have a brand new episode for Why Me Project. And you can also let us know if there's someone that you would like to hear on a future episode.
At Why Me Project on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Why Me Project at Outlook.com.